For centuries, humans have grappled with the ultimate existential question: who created God? Before the heavens and earth were made, when there was darkness and formlessness in the face of deep, even when there was no time, God existed. He called light out darkness and created formless shapes into existence. But the question still calls for an answer. Where did God come from? Did you know the earth was created 6,000 years ago in 6 days by God? I am confused. Being philosophically consistent and being a very honest person, I'm sure you can tell me where God came from. This was a profound question one logical reasoning philosopher asked me at a conference I went to. He continued that I should also try to clarify to him how I can figure out how a spiritual force can have an impact on a material universe to create it. Here's the thing. Anyone that has existed on the earth, this question must have come up in your mind. I wasn't angry or disturbed at the philosopher because this was probably the very first theological question I think I ever asked my parents and pastor as a child. However, if you believe that God created the universe, then logically, you've got to ask the question, who created God? And then you have to ask, who created the God that created the God who created the God that created the God that created God, and so on to infinitum. Let's open the secret that most people don't understand. Who created God? If you ask that question, it shows you've immediately categorized God as a created being. So you're talking about a created God. Thinking about who created God. In your mind, you are already looking to see where he came from or who formed him. This question is extremely interesting because it's an illustration of a question that already rules out the explanation that's most likely to be true, because the Christian claim is that God wasn't created. Take, for instance, Psalm 90. 2 says, "Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting you are God." Did it actually say, "From everlasting to everlasting you are God"? That means God himself is eternal. So, who created the eternal that created the eternal that created the eternal God? While I was in Vietnam, I started a Bible study. The Lord led me to answer life's three biggest questions. Where did I come from? Who am I? And where am I going? I have found that most people have never answered these questions satisfactorily. But here was the most turning part of my life. In one of my meetings, a proclaimed atheist decided he would attend and create a little trouble. However, he succeeded. Here is what he did. He ridiculed me, asked questions I couldn't answer, and basically made me look like a fool. Then, he just walked out and took all the men in the Bible study with him. Then, about 30 minutes later, this man came back. I was praying, "God, give me another chance to reach this man." Suddenly, he walked over and, standing in front of me, said two striking statements I will never forget. "I want what you have." Surprised, I said, "You do?" He told me that he knew he had discredited me and out-argued me on every point, but what I had was more than an argument. He continued, "You have a real relationship with God, and I want one." Praise God, I was able to lead this man to the Lord. This proclaimed atheist told me later that deep in his heart, he really knew there was a God. Now here is the point. Whatever you believe, we accept that you can't get something from nothing, right? Once upon a time, there was absolutely nothing, and then all of a sudden, there was everything or anything. How did all those things come to be? That just goes against all logic. So if you believe that you can get something from nothing, and you accept that there is now something, you, who are watching this video, are evidence of that something. Then, there must have always been something that brought something into this world. Everyone has to believe that something has been forever. Otherwise, we'd still have nothing. So it's a question of what is something that has been around forever. Now, here's the thing. Everything we know about the physical world tells us that it's not a good candidate for something that has been around forever, especially since the 1930s with the acceptance of the Big Bang Theory. The second law of thermodynamics is very well established. The sun is running out of energy. We now know that the farther out we go, the faster the universe is expanding, so the expansion seems to be speeding up, and we have no way of explaining that. Energy is being used, and everything we know about it is that it's used up. So the physical world, physical reality, isn't a good candidate for something that must have always been for there to be anything. So whatever there was, that is, the cause of what is, must be quite different from what is, because what is, by definition, as far as we know, can't always have been. But let me ask you this. Every object around you, the chairs in your home, all you see on earth, where did they originate? Did it come into being just like that, or were they crafted by someone? Get this. None of these elements can account for their own existence, nor can the sum of all contingent things explain itself. They're like a rope. Everything depends on everything else. Eventually, one must posit something fundamentally different from what we're attempting to explain to account for our observations. Now, if God is uncreated, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He simply was. The core assertion in Christianity, as in Judaism and Islam, is God's eternal nature. Thus, the question of origin, by definition, doesn't apply to him. The only way to construct a counter-argument is to presume everything falls into the category of the created. But that merely sidesteps the initial question. Even the Greeks grappled with this concept, which is why the Greek philosophers have been captivated by two distinct categories: things that came into being, the created, and things that already were. This leads me to a profound question a physicist who doesn't believe in God's existence once asked me. You see, after addressing a group of scientists, the logical reasoning I discussed in that meeting was from the Bible. This man said my speech was incredible, but he had one question. Do I believe in the Trinity? If this Trinity exists, should I explain to him how they were created? I replied, "May I ask you something first?" "Certainly," he said. "What is gravity and how was it created?" He pondered briefly, then admitted it just came into being. I asked him, "From where?" He said he doesn't know. Fair enough. I told him let's try an easier one. What is energy? Well, as a physicist, I can measure and utilize energy. I told him that is not what I asked. What is it? I don't know. He conceded. Do you believe in gravity? He answered yes. Do you believe in energy? Yes. How can you believe in what you don't see and touch? His reply was astounding. He said he feels the impact of gravity and energy on the earth. I shouted, "That's exactly the answer you are requesting from me." Everybody on earth feels the impact of an eternal being. The galaxy and the sun, the way they were orchestrated and arranged, shows that there is an extraordinary intelligent being that brought all these things to existence. They didn't just appear from nowhere. So if you can't define energy, and nobody can, don't be surprised if energy, light, gravity, and consciousness remain mysterious. And don't be astonished to find an element of this mystery in God. They're all interconnected. The question, who created God, is not at all difficult to answer. As Keith Ward points out in his book, God, Chance, and Necessity, if one asks what caused God, the answer is that nothing could bring into being a reality that wholly transcends space-time and which is self-existent. To fail to grasp such an idea is to fail to grasp what God is. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Something cannot come into being out of nothing. But if something is eternal and timeless, then it doesn't fall under that first premise. It doesn't need a cause. The concept of God is the concept of an eternal, self-existent, necessary being. Therefore, the answer is simply that God is uncaused. He is self-existent. Our definition of God is the uncreated creator of the universe. Do we, as Christians, have a problem in grounding our beliefs in God as an uncreated being? Though I was in that phase before, but now it is all clear. What is time? What is matter? And what is space? These three things have been consistently taught to us from childhood. Even in physics, we learn a lot from it. But do you know that God is not bound by time? He created time, which means that He is bigger than time. Time only operates in this three-dimensional zone. The scripture says, "Heaven is God's throne, but the earth is His footstool." Can you comprehend how God uses the earth as His footstool? All right, your question, where did God come from? If there were matter and space but no time, when would you put it? You cannot have time, space, or matter independently. They have to come into existence simultaneously. The Bible answers that in 10 words. In the beginning, for time, God created the heaven, that's space, and the earth, that's matter. So you have time, space, and matter created, a trinity of trinities. Just as you know, time is past, present, and future. Space has length, width, and height. Matter has solid, liquid, and gas. The God who created them has to be outside of them. If He's limited by time, He's not God. The guy who created this video game is not in the video game. He's not running around there changing the numbers on the game while you are playing it. The God who created this universe is outside of the universe. He's above and beyond it and in it, through it. He's unaffected by it. Meanwhile, the question here is, where did God come from? Make no mistake to assume a limited God, and that's your problem. The God that I worship is not limited by time, space, or matter. If I could fit the infinite God in my 3-pound brain, He would not be worth worshiping, that's for certain. So that's the God that I worship. Habakkuk sounded it vividly. I saw him when he left the hills of Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. And Teman means nothing and nowhere. So he came from nowhere. Categorically, God came from nowhere. If you're saying I should be reasonable, why should I say that God came from nowhere? It doesn't make sense. Fine. If you just want to be reasonable about it, the reason God came from nowhere is there wasn't anywhere for Him to come from. And coming from nowhere, He stood on nothing. The reason He had to stand on nothing was that there was nowhere for Him to stand. Standing on nothing, He reached out where there was nowhere to reach and caught something when there was nothing to catch. He hung something on nothing and told it to stay there. The book, Job 26:7 says that God hung this world on nothing. This means God stood in nothing and created all these things we see. Remember, the Bible said in Deuteronomy that the hidden things belong to God and the revealed things belong to His sons. Please just subscribe to stay updated to new videos I will upload soon. Like and share these videos to your friend. Thank you for watching.